want to start with your strategy. Intel has touted its own chips based on its own designs for years. Now you are changing course and doubling down on outsourcing. Why change something that is so fundamental to Intel's success story?
Yeah, thank you, Emily, and great to be with you and Bloomberg today. The core IDM 2.0, integrated design manufacturing version 2, as I call it, says, hey, we're going to manufacture the majority internal, continue to build on that great heritage, but also leverage external foundry in a more strategic way. And there's a big shift in the industry underway from system on chip to system on package. And really our ability to leverage the world's best 3D packaging technology so that we get to pick the best tiles from across the industry. And third, to become a foundry. Those three taken together form this IDM 2.0 because I'm committed to the best products in every category that we participate in, the best cost structure, and the most resilient supply chain. And we see this ability to leverage the industry, but also become a major supplier of foundry to the industry. This is a winning formula, and the world is demanding more semiconductors than ever before. We were getting more digital, and then COVID happened, right? And it's accelerated. So we need to step into this in a big way, and I think our strategy is uniquely positioned for Intel to be able to execute on.
Now, investors loved hearing you say Intel's fixed all its problems. But Pat, you've been back at the company for just over a month, and we're talking about production deadlines that were missed over years. What makes you so sure that you've diagnosed and solved the manufacturing problems?
Yeah, the fundamental issue was around EUV. And what happened was EUV, extreme ultraviolet lithography, and lithography is the core of semiconductor manufacturing, this ability to essentially print images. And what happened was 10 nanometers delayed. It pushed 7 nanometers out, a domino effect. And EUV went from nascent to mature over that period of time. And some of our other some of the other foundries like TSMC embraced it very aggressively, and we were still having too much complexity betting against it. And what we did over the last 6 months was re-architect the process to put EUV in a very prominent way. And since we did that, we're now getting very good results. And we're seeing our defect densities, process maturity come along very rapidly. In fact, the other thing that I announced was not only was 7 nanometers healthy, that we were on track, but we're moving to a yearly cadence of process innovations following that. So we're on track to not only fix the issue, but be at parity, and then parity plus, and ultimately, we believe, sustained leadership into the future. So the path we're on, looked at the data quite extensively over the last month or so, and came to the conclusion, yeah, the team got it figured out. We're back. And as you've seen more broadly with our new Intel IDM 2.0 strategy, as I've declared, Intel is back.
Indeed. Now, you suggested companies like Apple and Qualcomm could be your customers. Why would they be your customers if they are your competitors? Why should a fierce rival also work with you?
Well, as you well know, Emily, and I think you've even written on the subject about coopetition. And clearly this idea that, in some domains you might compete, in other domains you might be competitors, customers and partners as well. And for that, there's very few companies that can step into advanced semiconductor technology, something that we've only used for our internal needs at scale before. But now we're saying we're going to open our fab doors wide for the industry. And with that in mind, customers are looking and saying, I only have TSMC, Samsung, and Intel as the leading choices, and only one of those is on Western US and European soil at scale. Wow, I need a more balanced supply chain. I want to have at least 2 suppliers of my advanced technology choices. And Intel is saying we're going to be that. But there might be some skepticism because we've somewhat half-heartedly tried some of this in the past. And we're saying we are boldly going down this path. We're going to have our best technologies, our unique 3D packaging technologies, and I'm going to be making all of my intellectual property available, including my x86 cores for these customers. So we're really going at it with the best that Intel has to offer. And the world needs more semiconductors. The world needs a more balanced supply chain. We're one of the few companies that can step in to do that.
What are the financial implications of the move? You're obviously raising your capital spend by $6 billion. When does this all start paying off?
Well, it is a capital intensive cycle. Takes a couple of years to build fabs, so you invest well before you have that foundry capability up and running at scale. That said, we are seeing extraordinary demand signals from the industry for today's products. So part of this is I get to flexibly build capacity that meets my products as well as foundry needs. And we expect that we'll run a factory network that has some optimized for our products, some optimized for foundry, and some flex fabs in between because we need to be at scale across the business. But we do think it takes a couple of years to build this out as designs take time to be committed to a new process and then test and ramping in manufacturing. But we're underway. We already have some existing foundry customers at small scale that will start ramping up more rapidly. So this business will get underway. We've estimated the overall foundry market at 100 billion by 2025, and we're going to earnestly pursue a meaningful portion of that.
What does this all mean for the chip shortage, which has been so devastating to the industry at a time when chips are desperately needed? When will the chip shortage end?
Yeah, it's a great question, Emily. And the first thing would be is how do we get here? Because we were on this path to more digitization of humanity, and then COVID happened, and what we saw was this. COVID caused everybody to step back a bit from capacity and build out and the supply chain of the industry, and it induced a radical increase in demand. So you have supply chains scaling back a bit and demand scaling up radically. Wow. And now we're in a position that there's a meaningful shortage. And, it's going to be a couple of years until that's fully resolved, is my expectation. We, in our announcements yesterday, are saying we're going to start helping on that as quickly as possible. And I've asked our team, hey, can we help the auto industry and get some of those designs moved even more quickly than might have otherwise been the case? So we're going to start stepping into it. But I do think that the total supply chain, we're a couple of years until this is all fixed. But Intel, and part of our IDM 2.0 strategy, we see ourselves as better than most because we get to leverage industry as well as our own factories. And I'll tell you, we are driving them super hard, 7 by 24, to be able to scale and meet our customer commitments and demands as rapidly as possible.
Now, Pat, U.S. politicians, the Biden administration, even the Trump administration had been quite alarmed about the decline of chip making capabilities in the United States. What does this mean for U.S. competitiveness in chip making? And have you gotten a reaction from the Biden administration to your plans to double down on manufacturing in the United States?
Yeah, been a real outpouring of support, not just from customers in the industry, but from the administrations in the US as well as EU. So there's great interest in what we announced yesterday. Late last year, the CHIP Act was passed. Now it needs to be funded. There's been some, I spoke yesterday with Senator Wyden, who chairs the Finance Committee. Great support from bipartisan in Congress and Senate for the funding of that. We've also gotten strong support from the Biden administration. In our announcement yesterday, we had Secretary of Commerce Raimondo participate with us for affirming statements from Biden and from the cabinet. So strong interest. Now we got to get the wheels fully in motion with funding and the mechanisms in place that we can, accelerate what we are working on with the industry. Yesterday's statement, though, from Intel, we put our chips on the table. We're making these investments and commitments without a penny of funding from governments or states. However, we believe that they can be meaningfully accelerated and expanded by seeing increased commitments by governments in US and Europe. So we're doing our part, and we hope to scale that up dramatically with strong support from the administration.
Meantime, we're seeing a rise in aggressive and destructive cyber attacks from nation states, from China, from Russia. How alarming is that to you? And what are the national security implications of your plan?
Yeah, it's incredible, Emily. And being in the industry now for 40 years, you always think that, boy, we're spending so much on cyber. We've got, and then as soon as you feel like, oh, we're there, something happens. like a solar winds, and boom, it takes it to a higher level, just over and over again. So I just say, I think there's no end to some of the challenges in the cyber domain. Clearly, part of the motivation by the US and the EU is a more balanced supply chain globally and having more of that intellectual property done on US soil for a secure supply chain of more of the critical elements for defense and non defense uses. This is clearly something that we see our announcements of yesterday as being well aligned to be one of the potential ways that those needs are met. We're competing for what's called the RAMP C program, a government program to meet some of those needs. So we've submitted the proposal that we would satisfy those requirements. So we want to step in to help fulfill some of those needs and do it as part of this larger IDM 2.0 strategy, US, Europe, global supply. We believe we can be a helpful mechanism to eliminate some of those risks and needs with what we described.
And looking at this broad and very interconnected chip industry, how will the relationship with TSMC and Samsung work as a supplier if you are now also in competition with them?
Coopetition is alive and well. And we'll say very clearly, we have committed to substantial designs with TSMC, Samsung, as well as global foundries and UMC. So we really are working with the foundry ecosystem. And I expect in some cases we'll be uniquely partnering and doing research with them and helping some of our shared customers, because a customer may look and say, hey, I'm going to get this tile from TSMC, and I'm going to get this tile from UMC, and I'm going to put it on a package, a 3D package from Intel, and have them do the final assembly and test. And we're going to say yes, right? So we're going to be partnering with them to meet the customer requirements. I'm also a customer, a very large customer of TSMC and Samsung. We also have a broad set of areas that we're working together as shared motivations in the industry for some advanced technologies with them. So it very much is an important partnership for us. Overall, the rising tide of semiconductors and digitization, this is a large market, 100 billion by 2025. So both of us are chasing to catch up to the demand for that. So I believe they're a great company, TSMC, Samsung, one of the greatest technology companies of all time, highly respected relationships in growing, accelerating markets. We will be excited about the partnerships that we have, even as we might be competing for some particular pieces of business here and there.
Now, as you said on the call and today, Intel is back. Where do you think Intel went wrong? Where did the company lose its way?
Yeah, I believe over the last decade, a variety of decisions were made. There was, examples like in the 10 nanometers that I think was a bit of hubris and arrogance. That's, 14, we were starting to, struggle a little bit. And so we did a Hail Mary at 10 nanometers, introduced too much complexity into the process design that we had. And all of a sudden, it's like, wow, we couldn't go that much harder and faster than the industry. And we were, a little bit too internally focused. We also lost some of the tick-tock disciplines that we had instituted over a decade ago, and some of that, parallel design teams that are always working somewhat cooperatively, but somewhat competitively to assure that we're staying ahead. Also, there was a lot of internal focus, Emily, that we didn't use the industry design tools. We did our own, and our process was uniquely optimized for our products, and they were tightly linked together. So a variety of these things caused Intel to stumble. What I was very pleased with when I came back to the company was many of these things were already underway to be fixed, getting more alignment with the industry standards, leveraging design tools. And yesterday, Cadence and Synopsys were supportive of the announcements that we have laid out. The execution machines are starting to get back in place, bringing people like Sunil Shenoy back. He and I helped create the tick-tock model, get it back in place as quickly as possible. And our process teams, humbled, but hungry to get back to parity and leadership with the industry. So many things underway, and it's really my job just to help pour fuel in the fire for them to go faster. And when I say Intel is back, that's what I mean.
So speaking of the fuel and faster, you're also investing in R&D, you're partnering with IBM. What else can you do to accelerate the transformation in ways that will really bring revenue through the door and fast?
Yeah, and I do think that in this environment, it really is a demand constrained, I mean, a demand centric environment. It is really just how can I scale manufacturing more quickly? And we're pressing our fab teams, our manufacturing teams, our supply chains. How can we catch up to this overwhelming demand that we have? So right now, it's all about just going faster for the products that we're currently scaling up in manufacturing, improving yields, finding ways to optimize substrates coming out of Asia and be able to lower the yield loss that we see every aspect of this. But this is what we're good at. I'll tell you, we're getting the teams fired up to say, can I get another million, another 5 million, another 10 million units that we can ship? Because in this environment, every unit I ship, it's gaining market share as well. So we're quite excited, and we're seeing good strength and momentum from our teams.
Mobileye may be one of the more interesting parts of Intel where you'll be competing with self-driving car operations like Google's Waymo and GM's Cruise and NVIDIA. How do you envision that playing out?
Well, I am just thrilled by that team and Amnon and the team there, that's centered in Israel, really are at the forefront of autonomous operations. It's really stunning what they're now able to accomplish. And with that in mind, we've also seen that they're able to leverage Intel, leverage things like our LiDAR based on silicon photonics that I helped start 20 years ago, right, are now the leading capabilities in that space. So overall, it's a very exciting capability. And right now we're in an extraordinary period where they're leveraging Intel, not being constrained, but finding all sorts of ways to leverage the technology base here and finding extraordinary interest from the marketplace to really be a leading alternative for the world of autonomous capabilities globally. So quite excited. And I do think this is going to be one of those things a couple of years from now, we're going to look and say, wow, that was a great decision to have them being part of Intel because they got to leverage us, but still pursue their business aggressively and somewhat distinctly in the industry from the bigger Intel.
Now, shares opened up this morning. They're about flat now. I spoke to an analyst who said this is the honeymoon phase. Investors want to be optimistic, but this phase will be short-lived. As you get ready to chart your next course, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I do think there's been, a bit of skepticism, and we've had the bulls and the bears around the stock. We've also had some fast money going through the shares and trying to figure out what it's going to look like. I'm interested in long-term investors that are, committed to the strategy that we're laying out. And I'll tell you, as I've talked to, a lot of those investors, they are thrilled. They are excited to see Intel back. And I do think that we're going to have a very good run of the company with great financial returns. Because part of it is, we're just trading at multiples well below the industry because people were uncertain. What is the vision? What is the strategy? How's this going to play out? And I want our investors to know that we are here to build one of the most extraordinary technology innovative companies of all times. The market needs more semiconductors. Intel is going to step into that in a big way. We are passionate about the future that we're going to chart for the customers, for the industry, for our investors. But ultimately, we have a higher purpose, Emily. We are out to improve the lives of every human on the planet with a bit of Intel technology. And that's something few companies get to say. And it's going to be a great ride, and we're charting a course to go get there very rapidly.